Side of Paradise was his first book that he did, and I had never read it until recently. It was one of the ones that I'd skipped along the way. And it's very interesting because it parodies, without being too much autobiographical, it parodies a lot of his experiences as a young man and his years at Princeton. And it carries through the main character through all of the early 1920s wealthy class of people, all the things that go on, and some of it's critical of that. It kind of falters back and forth between really enjoying this wonderful prosperity age and then criticizing it as well. And it's interesting, and I don't want to give any more of the plot away for you because I want you to read it, but I'll read you a paragraph from the end of it, which I thought was really kind of interesting. And it says, "Long after midnight, the towers and the spires of Princeton were visible, with here and there a late burning light, and suddenly, out of the clear darkness, the sound of bells. As the endless dream it went on, the spirit of the past brooding over the new generation, the chosen youth from the muddled, unchastened, forgotten dreams of dead statesmen and poets. Here was a new generation shouting out the old cries, learning the old creeds, out into that dirty gray turmoil to follow love and pride, a new generation dedicated more than the last to the fear of poverty and the worship of success, grown up to find all gods dead, all wars fought, all faith in man shaken. And Marie, sorry for them, was still not sorry for himself. Art, politics, religion, whatever his medium should be. He knew he was safe now, free from all the hysteria. He could accept what was acceptable, roam, grow, rebel, sleep deep through many nights. There was no God in his heart, he knew. His ideas were still in riot. There was ever the pain of memory, the regret of his lost youth, yet the waters of disillusion had left a deposit on his soul. Responsibility and love of life, the faint stirring of old ambitions and unrealized dreams. But oh, Rosalind, Rosalind, it's all a poor substitute at best, he thought sadly. And he could not tell why the struggle was worthwhile, why he had determined to use to the utmost himself and his heritage from the personalities he had passed. He stretched out his arms to the crystalline radiant sky. "I know myself," he cried, "but that's all." And so I just enjoyed that passage. Thank you very much for letting me share it.
Well, thank you, INKTANK, again for tolerating my neurotic approach to writing. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Quite a disrelationship he had with his wife, Zelda. Søren Kierkegaard defined a disrelationship in a marriage where one couple relates only to himself or herself, and which is true in the case of the self-absorbed, highly talented F. Scott Fitzgerald, who turned out to be kind of a predator of his wife's work, and moreover a cannibal, in that he cannibalized not only her diaries and her novel and manuscripts, but events from their stressful married life. They sort of encouraged each other to have affairs. They were both alcoholic, heavily into gin. So what is interesting is the first interview with Zelda, who eventually ended up in a madhouse, Baker acted by her husband. I'm going to quote now from a literary critic, Harold Bloom. It says, "When F. Scott Fitzgerald's second novel was published, a newspaper editor asked the author's wife whether she'd consider reviewing it for the New York Times Tribune. As she read her husband's book with the sharp eye of a paid professional, she recognized not only the autobiographical tenor of The Beautiful and the Damned that Ian alluded to, but also cleverly attributed to a female lead too much like herself. Whole passages, in fact, authored by her. It seems to me," she wrote in her review, "that on one page I recognized a portion of an old diary of mine which mysteriously disappeared. And also scraps of letters which, though considerably edited, sound to me vaguely familiar. In fact, Mr. Fitzgerald," I believe that's how he spells his name, "seems to believe that plagiarism begins at home." She was being modest. The truth is that Scott used a great deal of Zelda's writing, credited to characters he modeled after her. In every book he completed in his short, abbreviated life, died of a heart attack from just imbibing in the good life. That Zelda was Scott's muse is hardly news, and it comes as no surprise that her frank sexuality, the wild abandon with which she flaunted her body at parties and threw herself at men and women, gave color to her stories. More has been written about the Fitzgerald, their antics and affairs, than they can possibly have known about themselves. Now, personally, I was hoping that we'd have our F. Scott Fitzgerald literary afternoon at the Don Cesar, where they stayed. And in fact, it was there that Fitzgerald stirred his wife into one of her breakdowns, and that required treatment. Now, I asked my better half there, were you able to find the short story there? Yes, okay, I just want to quote a tiny paragraph and then go on to something, because my wife and I, we have,
You have the same book on?
yeah, similar competitiveness and what we like to call our 50-year marriage as the old S&M tango. And we criticize each other's work pretty severely and steal from each other as much as possible. So I have a great deal of kinship with F. Scott Fitzgerald and his relationship with Zelda. In the short story titled "What a Handsome Pair," the epigram says, "The feelings of competition between the Fitzgerald was fierce. she sought her career as a dancer, painter, and writer. This story was engendered by a mutual resentment that resulted from the publication of Zelda Fitzgerald's only novel, Save Me the Waltz. And it was, chief character there was called Alabama because she's from Alabama. And he had difficulty coping with that. But, you know, he set her up to have an affair, and she set him up, and they kind of tortured each other with this, enjoyed it sexually, I think, exploited it, you know, kind of a menage a trois thing. But then it turned on them. Just want to quote a little bit here from What a Handsome Pair. Did you kiss him? She hesitated. Yes, so. She stood up from the piano stool and said, I feel as if I had a cannonball in my stomach. And the butler announced, Mr. Stuart Oldhorn. This is the other guy that she's doing. Is he the man? Teddy demanded tensely. She was suddenly upset and confused. He could have come later. Would you rather go without meeting him? But Stuart Oldhorn, made confident by his new sense of proprietorship, he bought a horse, had followed the butler. The two men regarded each other with a curious impotence of expression that can be between men in that position, for their relation is indirect and consists of how much each of them has possessed or will possess the woman in question, and when and how. So that emotion passed quite unnoticeably between them, as though a bad telephone connection. Stuart Oldhorn sat beside Helen, his polite eyes never leaving Teddy. He had the same glowing physical power as she. He had been a star athlete at Yale and a rough rider in Cuba, and was the best young horseman on Long Island. Women loved him not only for his pants, actually points, but for a real sweetness of temper. You've lived so much in Europe that I don't often see you, he said to Teddy. Teddy didn't answer, and Stuart Oldhorn turned to Helen. I'm early, I didn't realize. Well, you came at the right time, old boy, said Teddy. That old boy doesn't have it resonate from the Great Gatsby, said Teddy rather harshly. I stayed to play and to congratulate you. To Helen's alarm, he turned and ran his fingers over the keyboard. Then he began what he was playing. Neither Helen nor Stuart knew, but Teddy always remembered. He put his mind in order with a short resume of the history of music, beginning with some chords from the Messiah and ending with Debussy's Le Plus que, which had an evocative quality for him because he had first heard it in the day his brother died. Then, pausing for an instant, he began to play more thoughtfully, and the lovers on the sofa could feel that they were quite alone. Then he had left them and had no more traffic with them. And then Helen's discomfort intensified. But the flight, the elusiveness of the music piqued her, gave her a feeling of annoyance. If Teddy had played the current sentimental song from Hermione and had played it with feeling, she would have understood and been moved, but she was plunging her suddenly into a world of mature emotions, whither her nature could or wished, neither could follow. And the rest is all about horses, but
what year was that one written? I know it says at the beginning in the
1932 Saturday Evening Post. Okay, he was such a handsome young man with gorgeous green eyes.
Tijan, this dream's where you belong. Your golden journey now has just begun. With your mother's arms to hold you, your brother's light to guide, your quest for wisdom will not be denied.